everyone, welcome back to Bookish with Melissa
and Lonnie.
Today we are here with Professor Solomon. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jeff Solomon. I'm a lecturer here at UC Davis English, and I teach all kinds of interesting courses on all kinds of interesting subjects.
Yes. We have first-hand experience of that because we met Professor Solomon in 140, which is post-colonial literature.
And I've taken like 18,000 of your classes.
You were in my 10C class.
10C, the British Lit one.
British Lit.
Lots of them.
And they were all good.
They were all super good. We'll talk about that later. 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Put those on the evals. Okay, first question though, Professor. What are your research and general interests? Doesn't have to be research, but what got you interested in what you do?
So I've shifted kind of a lot. When I started out in grad school, I had just come back to the country from being in Peace Corps, and I had been accused of working for the CIA for a really long time while I was in Peace Corps, maybe with merit, I'm not so sure. So I came back kind of unsettled about the country and what I was doing, so I really started out in a post-colonial studies program in Arkansas. And I got interested in post-colonial literature, and I'd always liked literature, but I don't think I understood that you could have a career in literature if you weren't a writer, and I wasn't a writer. So I kind of wanted to do that, but I quickly realized that all of my good teachers in post-colonial lit were people who came from the underdeveloped world and had firsthand experience. And as an American, I didn't really feel qualified to teach somebody else's experience. So then I transferred to USC. That's where I got my PhD. And I tried to bring a kind of a post-colonial studies point of view to American literature. And I kind of evolved. I really was interested in 20th century literature. And I kind of got talked out of it by my directors. And I eventually kept working my way back because I felt like I discovered these gaps in my understanding. Like I wanted to write about the 1950s and the first wave of Americans who were like the ugly Americans who went abroad to try to win hearts and minds. And I realized that I really had to know more about America's involvement with the rest of the world. So I rolled back from the Eisenhower era back to like the League of Nations era in the earlier 20th century. And then I realized that I really had to get into America's imperial phase. So I kind of went back to the Spanish-American War. But I just kind of kept like finding new gaps in my education and going back and back and back. And I ended up at the Revolutionary War in the 1770s. And I'm like, I just have to stop. So my dissertation focused on the very first, I'm going to call it the very first American novel, The Algerine Captive by Royal Tyler, which was the first novel in the U.S. to get a copyright, a U.S. copyright. There's some argument about which is the first American book, but that might be the first. It's one of the first American books, and I focused on that period up through the 1850s. So I kind of stopped with Melville. And I spent a long time working on that because, the dissertation's a big project. And I had left Los Angeles and I was living in a little cabin under the Redwoods in Mendocino, and my interests were shifting. But then I started teaching and I realized that I really didn't enjoy teaching the colonial American literature. So I've been finding a way to make bridges from that to 20th and 21st century literature ever since. So I mostly focus on activist literature in some way. I just did a class last quarter on literary activism and the environment, so kind of an eco-critical lit class, and that was fun. And I've taught classes on the Black Arts movement and the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s. That's probably where I focus most of my attention.
Oh, yeah. I am so interested in the Redwoods. How is that? Because I haven't taken any of your classes where we talked about that aspect, but we were talking about it last year when you gave me the book. Was it The Wild Trees?
The Wild Trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, by Richard Preston.
Tell us more. And then you were giving a talk in Fort Bragg, right?
Yeah, I'm still part of. I'm part of a kind of an artist collective in Fort Bragg. It's housed in the Larry Spring Museum of Common Sense Physics, which is in Fort Bragg. You can go visit.
Cool.
It's a very interesting space. And I work closely with an artist named Ann Beck, who has her own sort of artistic enterprise. But we won a Cal Arts grant, which is funded by the National Endowment of Humanities. So it's an NEH grant, but it's a Cal Arts grant. And our project is called Redwood Time. And we are focused on the kind of the development of the Redwood Empire in the northern coast of California. I just gave a talk this summer on if you go into Fort Bragg, you go to the main street in downtown, you'll see there's this giant slice of a redwood tree that they took down in the 1930s that was about 2,000 years old. And they have a timeline on it, which a lot of these, big tree rings, they'll do this. And the timeline is sort of strictly Eurocentric in the way that timelines used to be when they put those up. So they put it in right around the World War II period. And it still stands as a kind of a monument. And this is the introduction to the town and to Redwood Empire. So I gave a talk on the history of the Redwood Slice and logging in the area. And I talked a little bit about that Eurocentric timeline and really what it highlights and why it highlights what it highlights and also what it covers over because, the northern Pomo had lived in that area for thousands of years and they didn't make it onto that timeline for some reason. So it was a good opportunity to, again, bring in, my focus when I did my dissertation was on American representation of others. So Americans' representation of non-Americans. And that includes Native Americans because they were not considered American by the Anglo settlers. And so they often got written out of history. And, more recently we're writing them back into history and we're sort of acknowledging their presence, which I think is a good correction. So I'm glad that I get to be a little bit part of that. But the project in Fort Bragg is ongoing. Ann Beck has been organizing a kind of a community action where she invites people from the community or visitors to come and participate in a sewing circle. She's sewing a kind of a redwood cozy. It's actually it's like a casting of the redwood ring itself, and it's huge. It's 27 feet in diameter. It's a giant slice of an old tree. Taking those trees down was a crime. And there aren't that many of them left, which is a shame. But the ring itself is, it's impressive. And so her sewing circle has been working for, months now to sort of recreate a cover of this, and they'll display it at the museum.
Cool.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And I'm going to be going back there. I think they want me to come back again a few months from now, and I'll give another talk on that.
Yeah. I was telling Melissa about that. Actually, you never read the book. I still have the book that you gave me, and I keep it. I think it's an essay.
You have the book. Have you?
I did read it. I did read it last time. I told Melissa about the book. It was about the shrimps.
The shrimp in the canopies.
Yeah, and that was my favorite thing from the book. Like just taking away that shrimp, live in the canopy of redwoods. Guys, redwoods are amazing creatures.
Coral reefs in the sky.
Yeah, and they are, you think a redwood is big until you see an actually really big redwood. And it's ginormous.
Yeah.
Like the ones that in Muir Woods, tiny. They're tinier compared to the ones up north more. Those are ginormous.
Yeah, there's where is it where it's like they cut like a archway into one and you can drive through.
Yeah, it's the drive-through tree.
Yeah, and it's big enough for a decent sized car to go through, and it's still alive.
Yes.
If I'm correct, which is amazing.
Redwoods are incredibly hardy. Yeah. Even the ones that are cut down, they're not dead. The root system is alive and they put up daughters. So oftentimes you'll see a ring of small redwoods around a big stump. They call that a fairy ring. But really, those are all clones of the original tree. So it's the same tree. It's just bringing up its daughters all around it. Everybody should go drive through Avenue of the Giants up in Humboldt County. yeah, it's a a spiritual experience to be around trees that are that big and that majestic and that old.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes into, I had a question about, I noticed a lot of your papers were kind of centered around like Northern California. I know that you said you lived in Mendocino. Yeah. How does that affect kind of your outlook on literature?
that was again, so when I was writing my dissertation and kind of tired of writing about colonial America and the early 19th century America, I was living in this area that had a lot of activism, and so the counterculture was almost, it was very dispersed over the whole country, and really the counterculture was a global phenomenon, so it wasn't just here in the U.S. But here in the U.S., most of the attention was on San Francisco.
Yeah.
And San Francisco was kind of a magnet, especially in 1967, the Summer of Love, when it sort of crested in the media, and young people from all around the country who were dissatisfied with the kind of the prison-like atmosphere of American culture in the late 50s and early 60s, they wanted something better, so they flocked to San Francisco. And what happened is you had this sort of gigantic, unsustainable population of young people in the city, and they couldn't stay there. So they started to disperse, and a whole sort of system of communes emerged from San Francisco all the way up north to the border of Canada, really.
Yeah.
But one of the areas where a lot of them settled was in Mendocino along the coast, because it was, rural and sparsely populated and beautiful, and it was cheap to live there at that point. So there were a bunch of communes that sprung up on the North Coast in the late 60s and early 70s. Some of them are still going today. So while I was up there writing my dissertation, my neighbors, a lot of them were people who moved up there in the late 60s or the early 70s. They had been hippies. A lot of them were growing weeds, so they were kind of outlaws. And that was the economy after the lumber mills closed. The only way people had to really make money up there was tourism or growing weed, and so there's a lot of that up there. And still is, even though it's sort of quasi-legal now. But it was just really interesting. I got to know all of my neighbors, and they would share the experiences there. And so I started doing research on that area. And it wasn't unconnected to my own research, because that area was discovered by Anglo settlers fairly late. It wasn't until 1850 that Anglos discovered that part of the North Coast. It's rocky, and it's foggy, and there are these like steep cliffs, and the oceans are very dangerous for ships because they can't see, and there are sharp rocks and sea stacks offshore. And it wasn't until 1850 that a captain of a ship named the Frolic was heading to San Francisco and kind of got blown off course and ended up foundering in the waters just north of Mendocino. And they mostly survived. They escaped. They had to walk back from Mendocino to San Francisco. And as they were walking back, they noticed all the big trees. When they got to San Francisco, they mentioned that to people, and there were some people who were setting up lumber mills to take them farther north, like up to Oregon and Washington. And one guy in particular had a lumber mill all ready to go. He's like, "Well, I'll go up there," and that started the sort of the tree cutting, timber era in that part. But that was really 1850, 1851. So it's a little bit late for the development of Anglo communities in that area. Up until then, it had been Pomo territory. The Pomos lived there. They still do. They're still around. But they had a lot of their land taken away.
Wow.
I got off track, but it's a fascinating place. It's beautiful. Everybody should go there and see it.
Yeah, Mendocino. I've only been there once when I was
It's not that
younger.
far.
It's not that far from San Francisco. It's
I'm
really
sad
pretty.
sometimes, like you think about how lush our temperate rainforests are.
Yeah.
And then they're gone.
Yeah.
And they're also fire resistant. They're like bred and like for this state, like for our weather and stuff like that, and they're gone. So
I mean, there's still beautiful redwood forests up there, but they're all second growth and third growth forests because 96 or 97% of the old growth has been taken down. And as that book, The Wild Trees, points out, one of the problems with that is the ecosystem that evolves at the top of an old-growth redwood forest is so dense with life. And when you cut that down, the younger trees grow back, but that life doesn't come back. It takes thousands of years, really, before that ecosystem recovers. So, we won't be around to see it, which is unfortunate.
It's like a tree, and then trees grow out from the tree.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then shrimp. I still can't wrap my mind around the shrimp.
That's my favorite.
Are they shrimp or are they?
They are a kind of shrimp. They're very small. I mean, sea eagles, osprey, will catch fish. And then they will fly up to the top of redwoods and eat the fish. And the fish have these little shrimp that live in their scales, and they'll fall off into the tree. And there's so much water at the top of a redwood that it can actually maintain an ecosystem. So there are generations and generations of these ocean shrimp that live at the top of redwood trees.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Ecosystem.
And that's just one of the many creatures that lives in the canopy of the old growth redwood forest. But
They had pictures in the book. It was really nice. That was really informational. Sorry.
I'll have to give you the book too.
Yes.
I'll pass it down.
It's my mission. I'm like Johnny Appleseed, except spreading books
Professor,
wherever
I don't think you're gonna get that book back, honestly.
No, it's
when
okay.
did you
It's a nice
ask?
book. It was a couple. It was
You have to pass it on then.
Yeah, it was months ago. I just gave back Nuna's book also months ago. Okay, backtracking though.
Yes.
So, environmentalism. You went on the Peace Corps. You lived a very interesting life. But,
You make that sound like it's over. Wait, I'm getting out of here, right?
What? Don't say that, Professor. Don't say that. Okay, what are experiences that stuck with you that you carry on today in your work,
Okay.
As a student, just in life in general.
I'll start with being a student because I had formative experiences when I was younger. I think anybody who's moved when they're a kid, that moving changes your perception. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in the projects in Brooklyn, and when I was fairly young, my parents moved to a kind of a working class suburb south of Boston. So just that experience when I was a kid, moving from the city. I mean, Brooklyn is a big developed city, and the projects, which is its own sort of world, to Boston, which is geographically close, but culturally it's worlds apart. That was good for me. It was incredibly painful because I was very much an outsider where I grew up. But I kept having moments like that. So when I went to college the first time, I went to Los Angeles. I went to USC from undergrad too, and I was deliberately trying to get as far away from home. And that was I think my imagination was a little limited. I'm like, why didn't I think of University of Hawaii? But I didn't. But I ended up in LA, and that was a formative experience. I mean, going from the East Coast to the West Coast, especially back when I did. This was late '80s, and it was before the kind of the homogenation of American culture. So, things were very different. All the brands were different. Stores were different. People spoke in a different way. It was different. And LA is its own world. Yeah. And I had a great time in college. I always I'm sad when I hear college students who don't enjoy it. I'm like, you can, it can be so meaningful. You can get so much from your education. It's not just about checking a box. You can get a job. You really have to take advantage of it. But one of the things I did when I was an undergrad at USC is I went abroad. I took advantage of their they had a program where you could study abroad. So I spent a year in Canterbury, England.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was great. It was, classes were interesting, but that really wasn't what I was going for. I was going for the experience. And I had never, I'd been to Canada and I'd been to Mexico, but I'd never really been outside of the American sphere. So going to England was a really eye-opening experience, and living there for a year. It's one thing when you go visit a place for a couple of weeks, but really you have to live someplace to get a sense of it. Yeah. And a year is too short. But it was life-changing, and it kind of put this travel bug into my mind. I really wanted to do more of that, but I was poor. And I'm a first-generation college student in my family. My parents are working class. They don't have college degrees. Most of the people I went to high school with didn't go to college, or if they did, they went to the junior college that was right next to the high school. So I didn't really know how you manage that, especially when you're poor. And I worked for a little while in Los Angeles, and I figured out that one of the great ways to travel without any money is to do it for, the government. So I joined Peace Corps. And so I spent a couple of years in South America living in the Guyanas. And that was probably when that was a really meaningful experience for me. That really, even, traveling to England, I recognize the kind of the cultural privilege that it has an American, but I also recognize the way culture works. But when you go from, an English-speaking nation like the U.S. to another English-speaking nation like England, there are differences, but there are also a lot of similarities. And joining the Peace Corps and going to a developing country that was, that lacked infrastructure, that had just come out of a civil war, that had its own kind of turbulent colonial history, that was really eye-opening for me. And as I said, when I was serving, I was in a small village, and it was a truck ride through the rainforest, and then an outrigger canoe ride to where my village was. So it was very remote. The people who lived there had only seen white people when missionaries came through, or when people were there from the American sort of empire. So Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, had been taking aluminum out of the ground in Suriname, the country where I was stationed, for almost 100 years at that point. And aluminum is bauxite is an incredibly important resource for us. We make all of our weapons out of it. And so we'd been using Surinamese resources for a really long time. And then during the Civil War, the Americans were kicked out. And so when I was in the village, the people there, I think I mentioned this, they all just assumed I was working for the CIA. So I would introduce myself and say, hi, I'm with the Peace Corps. And they're like, oh, you're the American, the CIA guy, right? And I'm like, no, Peace Corps, not CIA. And after 2 years, I'm like, I think I'm CIA, because I was sending these reports back to the U.S. government, and they had me stationed in a place where the local warlord who had started the Civil War was still living in this little military compound. So I had to walk by his compound, and he had guards with AKs standing outside, and I'd wave to them don't shoot me. I wanted them to like me, and my villagers told me oh yeah, he knows you, and that scared me.
And you continued waving?
Oh yeah, I wanted the guards to like me. I didn't want them to shoot me. Yeah, so that was a really good experience for me, and it was eye-opening. And I was I was sort of shocked out of my American privilege, but it was also deeply unsettling. So I realized when I was done, when I came back, that I didn't really have a clear understanding of the U.S. relationship to the rest of the world. And especially, like I said, the kind of the suspicion and the hostility that people treated me with, that was eye-opening. I didn't realize people saw Americans that way. And I don't think I understood why they did. So that was what led me back to grad school. I didn't really have a sense that I was going to go back and get a PhD. I wanted to understand what had happened to me. And I felt a little bad about it. I mean, by the time I was done, I'm like, am I an agent of empire? I mean, that wasn't what I was signing up for. I just wanted a free trip someplace. Yeah. And so it was a really formative experience. It was a really rewarding experience in a lot of ways. I can't say enough about the Peace Corps. I think it's a great experience if you have an interest in the rest of the world, and you can do that. I strongly recommend it. But that said, it messed with my head, and I was uncomfortable about what I had done for years afterwards. So that was why I went back to school, and I studied post-colonial literature and theory, and I felt like it was really the first time that I was starting to piece things together in my own head. I'd been educated. I had a BA at that point, and I read widely, so I understood something about the world. But it forced me to realize that I understood something about the world from a strictly American perspective without recognizing that I had a strictly American perspective. I just thought I had a kind of a universal understanding when I'm like, oh, I actually don't. And in fact, the idea that you have a universal understanding of anything is kind of racist and culturally, culturally blind. And so I didn't want to be blind in that way.
Yeah. Do you have that travel bug now?
Yes.
Melissa just came back from Edinburgh.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I only did a semester there. So what you said about a year being too short, it definitely felt like a blank. But I definitely understand the cultural privilege and like going. So Scotland is obviously UK, but going there, I wanted to go there because I wanted to learn English, and Edinburgh is like a very big literary hub. But I think the difference between that and like when I go back to Thailand or when I go to other places in Asia, it's a very big shift that I agree it kind of messes with your head a little bit when you see the difference and understanding that what you know of certain things isn't universal.
Yeah.
I definitely got that.
I mean, it's such a valuable lesson to learn. You know, Mark Twain says travel broadens the mind, and it does. But it also makes you aware of your own limitations.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it does. It gives you this travel bug. Like once you recognize that, you want to know more. And that kind of was what drove me.
Definitely.
And I didn't. Yeah, I mean, you had the benefit of knowing other cultures, which I think is great. And I'm so pleased to know that so many of my students have that. And it's something that you can't teach that. You can't teach somebody to understand that. But it's incredibly valuable.
Definitely.
I mean, I don't actually travel. Like, I'm terrified of travel.
Really?
Not necessarily because of the travel, like going to places. It's the process of traveling that stresses me out. Just because, like, I didn't grow up going to places. I always stayed where I am. When you said, like, you moved a lot, Professor, that just reminded me, like, when I was a child, I had a fantasy of, like, moving to a whole nother city and then no one knowing me. And then I could recreate myself and be, like, nonchalant. I'm very chalant.
That's what college is, though.
Yeah. But then it didn't work. It didn't work. I was like, oh, dang it, I used emojis while I was texting. But I had that fantasy. And so I grew up stagnant. Like, everyone I know now, I've basically known for, like, 10 plus years. Like, I think people from high school to come up to college with me. I've known them for, like, at this point, like, 8 years maybe. So I just never traveled. Like, my parents never traveled. They kind of, like...
Well, they traveled here.
Yeah, that's true. They traveled here and they were like, okay, 20-year break. 20-year break. Like, let's just call it for, like, 20 years and we'll see how we stand, kind of. So I have that, like, mentality of, like, ooh, like, I just don't know where to even begin traveling. I'm going to Japan for the first time this year. So that's going to be my first ever, like, trip without parental supervision. I guess I've been to Canada. I haven't even been to, like, I've been to, like, Washington, D.C., and that's the only East Coast place I've been to.
Washington is weird.
It's very strange, and I've only been in, like, the D.C. place. I've never ventured out to, like, I think I've been to, like, a neighborhood, but that was it. Like, I've only been to, like, cities and stuff like that. So I get really nervous when I talk about, like, travel, just because I know that there's a travel bug, and I know I can get it, but it's the idea of, like, buying tickets, going through airports. I always hate airports. I always think I'm doing something illegal when I'm at airports.
I feel like that's like a lot of people.
I've gotten
like
patted down like almost every single time I've been at an airport.
I'm always scared they're gonna find something in my bag that I didn't put in there, and they're gonna be like, you're going to jail.
I take out all my stuff when I go through TSA, and they're like, put that back in. You don't need to take all the stuff out.
Some of that is not your fault. Some of it is just that's the cultural climate we live in now. It wasn't always like that.
That's true. But when I think of, like, traveling, like, I would like to travel a lot. Like, I did my thesis on The Sympathizer, right? But that wasn't actually out of, like, a need to understand the world. That was, like, an internal thing, That was, like, a personal history, my personal curiosity. So I never thought about travel as, like, I need to look for things externally, right? I always thought about, like, I would travel somewhere to understand something in myself. I guess that's kind of the same thing. I guess it's the same coin, just different sides.
You could follow that, though. I mean, his sequel takes place in France.
Yeah, that's true.
You could go to France.
That's true. Now just keep going.
Those people colonized your home, so you should learn about them.
That's true.
You go back and recolonize.
Yeah, I'll just stand there looking really mean. I know what you've done. But yeah, I think it's always interesting to hear because I want to travel more. Everyone says, like, when you're young, travel, you know, when you have the
It is easier
energy.
when you're young.
Yeah. That's what what my dad told me. Like, I told my dad, like, he always asked me, like, where I would like to travel to, because he says that I should because I'm younger. Like, he's like, when you have money, go anywhere you want, you know, like, figure it out. He's like, I'm old now. Like, I can't be walking 20K steps around a country I don't know, like, spending, like, nights in a hostel. Like, my back would just kill me.
I do have to say, I mean, I've slept on beaches and I've slept on barges, and those are not things I would, like, want to do now.
Okay,
but...
top three, like, places that you've slept in that aren't beds. Like, was the beach really comfy?
No, it was rock. So this was on Crete.
Uh-huh.
It was on the It was on the undeveloped side of Crete. I can't think of directions now, but it was a rocky beach, and it seemed like a safe place.
Yeah.
But it turned out that it wasn't.
What led to this encounter?
This was while I was going to school in England, and one of the great things about the school system in England, as far as I was concerned, is that it was a trimester system. So you went to class for the first 2 trimesters, and then the third trimester was independent study, where you were just doing study for your finals. But I saw that as, I don't have to be in class.
Travel.
Right on. So yeah, I bought a cheap, like, Eurail travel pass, and I just traveled the whole time. And so I was in Greece and sort of island hopping, and you could get cheap tickets. I don't know if you can still do this, but you could get cheap tickets back then on these, like, industrial barges, as long as you're willing to sleep on the actual, like, deck, and that's incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah. So I don't recommend sleeping on the deck of a ship.
3.
That's 2 that I think.
2.
But the beach that we ended up on, it was late at night. We had a hike. This was. As I said, it's the undeveloped side. So we took a bus from the port city to the other side of the island, and then we were hiking to a village that we saw on a map called Lutro. And we only got about halfway there when it got too dark to see, and it was a rocky path along high cliffs. So we decided that we would stop for the night, and so we slept on the beach. And it turned out it was low tide when we set up, and towards dawn the tide came in. And we only realized that when our toes got wet.
Your hokas got wet.
Yeah, so we woke up very quickly, and then bathed in the ocean. And the fishermen going out for that morning laughed at us as they went by.
So
that was
cool.
fun.
That's like a scene from a movie. That's so cool.
I don't know. I just imagine you
I honestly, like, I don't recommend any. Like, I slept in hammocks in the jungle when I was in Suriname, and that's incredibly uncomfortable. I know people who do that. Like, they like hammocks.
Yeah.
The hammocks are really uncomfortable. I had animals, like, crawling on. So I had it covered with a mosquito net. So it was almost like it was a hammock on the bottom, and then I had the mosquito net covering me on the top. But I had some strange animal that was, like, walking along the rope on my hammock, like, all night and freaking me out. So I was just, like, huddled under my mosquito net, hoping it wasn't, like, a jaguar, which I don't think it was.
No way. Jaguars are chunky.
Yes.
Yeah, jaguars are chunky.
This felt more like a monkey or a sloth.
Oh. I don't like monkeys.
I don't like monkeys either.
I think they're like raccoons. They're also aggressive.
Yeah, I think, and the fact that if you smile, they think you're showing aggression, and they also throw poop.
Oh, I just think they
do.
Yeah.
Like, they like
steal people's
We had
food.
howler monkeys in our village or close by, and it's deeply unsettling to hear howler monkeys at night. But it's also really cool.
Really? I feel like they sound like they're screaming.
They do, but it echoes for miles. I mean, and it's spooky.
Yeah. Especially at night, I can't. Yeah. That would have freaked me out.
And they had the village that I was in. They had this one sort of tribal religion. It was a Winti religion, and occasionally women would go out into the forest at night and scream. So hearing the howler monkeys and then occasionally hearing a human woman scream, deeply unsettling.
Yeah.
Cool though.
Oh yeah, cool. I can't wait to have stories like this. Like, Jenny, wait. So then, Crete hammock barge.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can't.
The hammocks are South America.
Okay. I Okay, my dad likes hammocks. He's the person who likes hammocks. We have like a hammock in our living room.
Really?
He like built the frame, and then he just takes it in and out to like as a party.
See, but a frame. Okay, the frame makes it better.
Yeah.
The hammocks that I was sleeping in didn't have a frame, so they're
I
just
feel
like
like they
coffins.
would swing,
yeah,
right? And you'd get nauseous. It'd be like you're on a boat.
And you're kind of bent in the middle in a way that I don't like.
And also, like, I feel like my back would feel so exposed because it's off the ground.
Oh, yeah.
What if something was on?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like when you're
being off the ground in the rainforest is actually not a bad thing.
That's true. That's true.
But you're like kind of. There's nothing.
Yeah, there's no support.
Yeah, so.
Especially, and like I'm kind of tall. I think if you're shorter, like the villages I lived with.
I see.
No slight.
Right. I could probably cuddle up on a hammock. Like I would just take the divot. Like the hammocks at in the MU. Mm-hmm. Good enough for me.
Yeah, every time I walk by the quad and I see a student chilling on a hammock, I think, oh, that does look comfortable.
You can never get one.
I feel like it's hard to get on and off.
Oh yeah, I saw someone fall off of it, and like people were helping her up, and I was like, I can't even blame you. Like
it
it's
takes
hard.
a little while.
Yeah. And she was like, oh my god, she was just laying there like, what happened? And she was like, the girl helping her up was like, it happened.
It's like when you get on a surfboard for the first time and you think, oh, I'm gonna be great. I'm gonna surf a wave, and then you figure out that you can't even sit on it.
Yeah. Okay, pause. Because actually not pause, because we like to split our podcast into like business and then fun
questions. Right. That was a good segue.
And I really want to ask Melissa's question
I wanted to
of what your favorite rap song is.
Okay.
Professor Solomon teaches rap as poetry here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've never
taken that one. I always wanted to take that. Yeah. It would never fit with my schedule.
It's only so they only offer it every so often, but and there used to be a grad student here who would teach it occasionally, but I got to teach it 2 or 3 times. I love that class. It's super fun. I mean, it's fun for me. Yeah. I have read my reviews on Rate My Professor. It's not super fun for everyone.
I can't.
Do you play rap songs in class? Is that like the structure
I
of it?
So I assign, like, because I'm coming at it from a literature perspective.
Yeah.
I like text, and so I usually assign albums. And because I'm angry all the time and focused on activism, I usually assign like politically activist stuff. So in that vein, my favorite song, I was thinking about this, I'm like, honestly, it's probably like For Free from To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick's album. But I was thinking about, like, you know, if I wanted to say like one song, like this is it would be They Schools by Dead Prez, which is kind of old school. It's got to be 2000, maybe 1999. But Dead Prez was like a serious activist. Like if you listen to I think it's Let's Get Free, or I think that's the name of the album.
Yeah.
It's a great album. Like, no skips on it. Kanye actually has a production credit on that. That was like when he was unknown. He did a remix of one of their songs, Hip Hop, or It's Bigger Than Hip Hop, which is a good song. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only like low light on that album. But the album itself is great.
Yes.
Okay, then going off of that,
yes.
What is your I wish I
wrote?
Be a song, but I was thinking about, I was like, it doesn't have to be a song. Like, you're so interesting, Chris Solomon. Like, what is the one thing that you look at and you're like, I wish I wrote this, I wish I produced this, I wish I, like, filmed this movie. What is that thing? Like, I wish I grew this tree, you know? Like, what is your, like, I'm jealous of this specific person or this specific thing that I didn't do it first?
You know what? I appreciate a lot of things, but I also recognize that I love literature, I love reading, but I also recognize that I'm not a creative person. Like, I don't want to write books. I want to read books. And I love teaching them because I enjoy them and I want other people to enjoy them. But I'm never like, I don't like read a book and think, oh, I wish I wrote that. I'm like, no, I couldn't do that. That's what artists do. I'm not an artist. But I'm always jealous of rock stars. Like, if I got to live my life over again, I would like go back to myself when I was like 6 and say, pick that guitar up and keep practicing because like this is the path. So I kind of want to be.
I can see it actually.
Yeah, but okay. My problem is I'm always romanticizing the past that I knew and not like the present. Like even now I'm like,
be the same.
I wish like I wish I was Tom York. Like I wish I had some hand in OK Computer. But even that's like. But what about like I don't want to do anything in the future. I want to go back and I want to be in Steely Dan and Led Zeppelin and Radiohead.
Yes.
Yeah.
This makes me think of John. For viewers who can't see John, John's hiding under the camera right now. John, confession. John used to be a hacker.
Yes,
Cool.
he worked for the
So
government.
John, what about you? Rock star? Hacker? John also helped make ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you could have stuck with it?
I don't think I would really, like, thinking back on it, I don't think I would have wanted to stick with it. Like, there's a reason I shifted away from that career path, just because I didn't want to be staring at a screen doing that kind of work all day.
I mean, that is the thing. Like, there's a difference between the achievement that we celebrate and the work that goes into it. Like, I love Steely Dan as a band. I love their whole musical catalog. But I've heard musicians who played with them talk about how they recorded, and it sounds nightmarish. Those guys had like such bad OCD, which would have been undiagnosed back then. They were such perfectionists. They took like a month and a half recording this one song that they eventually just decided not to do because it didn't come out the way they wanted it to sound. I'm like, that would be miserable. Yeah, and I'm not obsessive in that way, fortunately. So, like I said, I like to appreciate things. I don't necessarily wish I had had a hand in them. It would be cool to be in the room though. Like, like it would be great to have been a sound engineer, working with the Beatles in the '60s or something like that.
Time travel question.
Okay.
Okay, time travel question. One moment in history you wish you were there, and then if you wish you were there, would you wish you were in that moment
or like
just
a fly on the wall?
It?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think because of the work that I've done on like political activist kinds of things, the March on Washington with Martin Luther King. I mean that's that would have been so amazing to see that, to be there. Yeah. And I've talked to people who were there, and I'm always a little jealous of that. And it's funny because I've talked to people who are like at Woodstock, and I'm not jealous about that. I'm like, they made a good movie of that. I can watch it without any of the mud and all that. But yeah, they're like these seminal moments where history turns, and it would be incredible to see those safely.
Yeah. Well, you were at Canterbury. You were at Edinburgh. Old places. Do you feel like that ever? Like you're in history kind of.
Oh yeah, because I noticed that a lot of Edinburgh infrastructure is like hasn't been renewed in a really long time. So there was like, do you ever watch those old videos? Sometimes they post on YouTube and it's like
colorized.
Yeah, colorized Edinburgh, like 1930s or something like that, and it looks the exact same. So seeing that, I was like, wow, I am literally walking on the same.
That's one of the great things about traveling through Europe is that not only are those buildings still standing, but they've retrofitted them and sort of worked them into a modern architectural landscape. So it really is sort of postmodern, where you can see a building from the 12th century, the 13th century, standing next to a modern building.
And it's definitely a big shock because I remember I was in like a taxi and the driver was like, oh yeah, that building is probably older than your country. and at first I was like, oh, I don't know. That's so shocking.
Depends on which country you're claiming.
Yeah.
America. But yeah, US. He could tell that my accent.
That's true. I forget how young of a country you are sometimes. I'm in like a European history class. It's crazy. Like sometimes she'll throw out a date and I was just like, what were we doing back then? Like just coming and like messing up things, kicking down trash cans and just
cutting down trees.
Yeah, cutting down trees. Okay. Okay. I just wanted to ask that question because I was really jealous of Melissa traveling, actually. I was like, how could you go without me even though you asked me multiple times and I said no?
To come.
Every college student should take advantage of the opportunity to study abroad.
Yes.
It's such an eye-opening thing. It's such a great opportunity that we have. I seriously, like, that was the single best thing I did as an undergrad, was taking advantage of that and leaving LA to go to Canterbury.
Because it's so different from just like traveling. I think if you go to a school in another country, just like you get so much more of the culture and like because you're with professors and with students.
And
who
yeah,
live
I mean,
there.
especially the students who come from all over too.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the great things about the program that I went to in Canterbury. And I think this is University of Kent in Canterbury. I think that they were sort of known at the time for having a lot of international students come in, probably because they had to pay full price.
Yeah,
and they were getting more money.
Same way.
But it was. I mean, I met people from all around the world there.
Yeah.
That was the most international experience I had ever had in my life up to that point. So that was great. Everybody should have that.
Yeah, definitely.
And especially Americans, because we're kind of closed-minded and we don't know as much about, like, when I was traveling, even in South America, homeless people would come up to me and panhandle in like 6 different languages trying to get money from me, and I'm like, damn, I have a college degree and I speak one language.
Yeah.
We don't learn about other places and we should.
Yeah, especially what you said about how in like the 80s or even the 90s, how American cities weren't necessarily as homogenized as they are now. Now I feel like if I went to New York, it wouldn't necessarily feel like I'm in a whole different.
Like TikTok though.
Yeah.
I was talking about this like with my linguistics professor that like dialects are slowly becoming like, not all dialects obviously, but like people talk way more similarly now because of the internet, and it's like dispersing more. Like as we get older.
Yeah, especially bigger cities.
Yeah, and now like people want to do like what the urban like cities are doing, which is probably why like gentrification.
There's still plenty of diversity. There's still plenty of distinctive cultural characteristics every place you go. But it is true. I mean, this is what it is to live under late capitalism. Is everybody has the same stores. They all watch the same shows.
Yeah.
They get the same podcasts. if they're marketed well.
John, get on it.
They have the same sponsors.
John, I think our SEO is not really working.
Can you get our viewership up, please?
John, I want to be number 1 when you look up book. Okay, we're going to end our podcast, but we like to end our podcast episodes on shout-outs sometimes.
All right.
So you can shout out anything.
Literally anything that ever existed ever.
Shout out whoever told me that if I freeze my rice, it's better for me.
Really?
Yeah, it's something to do with the starch intake.
Oh.
And I've like seen enough things to be like, whoa, people are freezing potatoes or carbs, it like rearranges the starch or something, and then you just digest it slower, I guess, so you release glucose. I'm gonna be honest, if it's fake, it really saves me with meal prepping. Like shout out that person.
Yeah.
So rice.
Yeah.
So frozen rice.
Frozen rice
hack.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool stuff.
Okay. Shout out to Mila, my flatmate from Edinburgh. I just talked to her this morning.
We're sending this episode just for you.
Right on. Shout out to Edward Said's memory and Palestine, and let's not forget that country is still undergoing an awful time and could use more American attention and less American attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, do you have a shout out?
I got no shout-outs.
Shout out John.
Shout out John.
Thank you for editing this.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
47-minute video.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Professor Solomon, for coming on and agreeing to listen to us yap and ask you questions.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, we have a little sign off.
You have to do it with us.
You have to do it with us.
Okay.
So I say, and remember everyone, and then all of us say, stay bookish.
Okay.
Okay. And remember everyone,
Stay bookish.
Yay. Okay, bye.